What's up, y'all? Want to welcome you back to the HuntStand Podcast, Season 2, and this is your host, Will Cooper. The HuntStand Podcast is your weekly source for insightful conversations with veteran hunters, dedicated outdoor enthusiasts, and top industry personnel. I'm going to have guests on here who are true experts in their field, diving into the captivating world of our industry and the great outdoors. With each episode, you, the listener, will receive invaluable knowledge, tips, and guidance on how to enhance your skills in the wild and in life. Tune in to be entertained, informed, and driven to reach new heights. The HuntStand Podcast is brought to you by Yamaha and its full line of class-defining, adventure-seeking motorcycles, ATVs, and side-by-side vehicles. The HuntStand Podcast is also brought to you by Springfield Armory and their lineup of Model 2020 Waypoint rifles. And finally, the HuntStand Podcast is brought to you by StealthCam. It's never been easier to go wireless with the Command Pro app. Capture high-quality photos and videos of all the action wherever you hunt with StealthCam's advanced cameras and data plans tailored to your needs. So make sure to check out their website today, stealthcam.com. HuntStand Podcast, Season 2. Buckle up. It's going to be a good ride. Let's go. Well, Darron, dude, first and foremost, welcome to the HuntStand Podcast.
Thanks, man. Glad to be on here.
Yeah, dude, glad to finally get you on here and talk turkey. You know, we're just talking, it's cold up in your area, nice weather in y'all's terms is a little bit of snow on the ground over here down in Texas. It's nice, warm, 70, 80 degrees. And so, man, today we're going to talk turkey hunting, public land. But before we get into that, what I like to do to get each podcast started is I like for the guest to give the listeners kind of that 30-foot tree stand view of who you are, man. So, I mean, just kind of tell us who you are, where you're from, and kind of how you've gotten to where you are in life today.
Yeah, so I'm a full-time freelance outdoor writer. I live in Wisconsin. I'm married to my best friend, and public land hunting is what gets my blood going. I love the DIY angle. I love putting in the work and doing what it takes to get the result. And yeah, it's not an easy life being a freelancer. You got to really grind it out. And I think a lot of people misconceive that all we do is hunt. And, I'm fortunate to get to spend a lot of time hunting in the fall and in the spring. But what people don't see from the outside looking in is the hours and hours behind the computer to actually bring that content to life, whether it's a written piece or whether it's a video piece, whatever it might be. So what drives me in the DIY public land thing is Western big game specifically. I know that's not necessarily the topic today, but love elk hunting, love Western whitetail hunting, antelope, mule deer. I just love the wide open spaces. And honestly, I'm very happily married, but if I wasn't, I probably would have moved out west, quite some time ago, just because I truly love it that much. And we're fortunate though to get to live around family here in Wisconsin and then get to make several trips out west to kind of scratch that itch that I really love so much about the Western states. So that's kind of a little bit about me.
Dude, I'm right there with you, man. If I was a single guy, I would have been out west years ago. But, we're kind of in the same boat. We've got family here. So when you have a kid, it makes things a lot easier. So
yeah. So in Texas, I'm curious, there's not a lot of public land in comparison to some of these Western states. So what does that kind of look like for you when you want to go turkey hunting or whatever?
Man, it honestly kind of sucks. Being a resident, and just seeing what you guys have up there and like even in the Western states, what there is available for public land, I'm pretty envious of. I am very fortunate that my wife's great aunt, her godmother, her name's Nana, which we actually just did a HuntStand original on. She owns some property, so I'm pretty reluctant to get to go and hunt on that. And then I do have friends here that turkey hunting, it's not so much of a big deal to them. So I have a pretty easy access to turkey hunting down here. But when it comes to whitetail, man, that's a whole different ball game. I've been putting in for public land here in Texas for 7 years now, and I have yet to draw a tag. It's insane. Like I've put in for, I don't know how many different tags. I usually spend about, for each each application we want to put into, depending on whether it's like a rifle mule deer or archery WMA somewhere here in the state, I put in like $50-$60 worth of tags,
Wow.
each one valued at about three a pop. And I haven't drawn yet, man. So fingers crossed,
Wow.
maybe this year or next year will be my year. I don't know, but yeah, it's tough. And so you gotta know somebody or have the land yourself.
Yeah. Yeah, that does make it tough. Around here, there's some pretty large chunks of public, and then of course there's some other private lands that are open for public access, kind of like managed forest lands here in Wisconsin, and then like out in South Dakota and some of the other western states, there's the walk-in program, and that really makes it easy. And HuntStand definitely makes it really easy for people to go and explore some of those opportunities and really find what's available to go and hunt on.
Yeah, dude, absolutely. And yeah, we've got a few walk-in access areas here, but they are far and few between. Like the one that comes to my head is there's a piece around Lake Amistad down in Del Rio, which is a border town of Mexico.
Yeah.
It's bow hunt only. There's no motorized access. It's you park at the highway and you go in.
Yeah.
There's a couple like that, but yeah, all those Westerners out there and all you Western guys that are listening right now, y'all are very fortunate. So, but
Yeah.
but yeah, man, well, let's get into it, dude. Turkey hunting, public land. I want to find out from you because I want to go do this myself. I have yet to hunt turkeys on public land, so I really want to pick your brain more or less for selfish reasons here. I want to find out what you do and how you do it. So when it comes to chasing these public birds, I mean, what's step numero uno for you, man?
Well, it's all about habitat, right? Whether I hunt on public land or private land for turkeys, I always have the mindset that it's not going to happen where there isn't a bird.
Yeah.
Birds can travel, that's important to know,
Hmm.
but I'm not going to sit in a ground blind for a whole day. I've got I've got way too much energy to do something like that. I have done that in the past, and I've tried to make something happen in a place where it's just not going to happen. Now, last year it might have happened there, or next year it might, but right now, if it's not hot, I'm not going to spend a lot of time there. So the first part is really homing in on some habitat that really affords turkey activity. I want to look for places that have roost trees. I want to look for places that have agriculture or I call them wood snacks, acorns and things
Yeah.
like that. So that's number one. I want to have several different options that I can pop in and out of. And if there's not gobbling action, I'm moving on. I keep moving until I find something I like.
So I want to talk about, you're looking for these roosting trees and these wood snack, you know, how are you obviously boots on the ground, it's a different story. You can visually see it, you find it. But, for a lot of people, they may not have ever stepped foot on some of this public land. So how are you identifying some of this habitat that you're talking about with the roost trees, with finding some of these oaks or acorns? Like, how are you identifying that on HuntStand before you step foot in the woods?
So obviously, looking at the overview of a property, you can kind of tell by the hybrid map, if you use that one or one of the satellite maps, you can usually kind of tell the size of the timber.
Mhm.
Not down to the exact height or anything like that, but you
Right.
can definitely distinguish larger trees most of the time from smaller trees, and you can obviously a lot of times decipher between evergreens and deciduous trees. And not that turkeys don't roost in deciduous trees, they absolutely do. Hardwoods are great for turkeys, but I've found a lot of times if I can find a stand of red pines, turkeys love red pines. They're easy to fly up into, for one thing,
Mhm.
and another thing is they provide some of that like that thermal cover while they're up there on the roost. It's
Yeah.
just a really good tree for turkeys to roost in. So a lot of times I look for those if they're common in the area where I'll be hunting. Now food, obviously the crop history layer or crop history map is a great option to figure out kind of what's on the outskirts of some of these potential roosting areas. And so, it gives, obviously, as you know, it gives the planting from the previous year. So it might not be exactly relevant to right now, but I at least know that, that there's agriculture in the area and there's potential for there to be some food that turkeys are going to be, kind of drawn to. So that's kind of how I navigate the roost areas and potential food on the outskirts. Now, a lot of times people think the food's got to be right, on the public land, and in some cases it is, and obviously that helps. But if it's on the outskirts on adjacent private land, that can be equally as good, because those birds a lot of times will go and feed in the agriculture on private land, but a lot of times they roost on the public land where the timber is. So that's something to keep in mind, and that's definitely something that I follow when I'm kind of navigating this whole process.
Okay. Now, what about are there any specific terrain features you're looking at? Like, are you looking for saddles, anything in specific that may hold birds compared to others?
I think the biggest thing, and maybe it's not so much a terrain feature as it is a necessity, but I look for rivers, especially out west when I'm, going on some of the bigger tracts of public land. I'm looking for that riparian habitat where there's, potential to be big cottonwood trees, along those river corridors. And turkeys love that. They need the water, but also the roost trees that often are located along the perimeter. It's great for whitetails. It's great for turkeys. It's just a wildlife magnet usually. So that's one of the biggest things I look for. Now, my strategy is quite different from what you see if you watch some of the, the DIY YouTubers. A lot of times they're just setting up, where they call a turkey to the top of a hill. They basically make the turkey come looking for them, right?
Yeah.
Where I'm using decoys almost all the time. Now, when I shotgun hunt and I got a bird spotted and I think I can cut him off, then I'll leave the decoys, behind. But I'm using decoys at least 80% of the time. And when I bow hunt, which I do a lot of bow hunting for turkeys, I use them 100% of the time for bow hunting. So what that means is I'm not setting up in the thick cover. Usually I'm looking for open areas. I'm looking for fields, food plots, if they're available on, like the DNR lands or the game and fish, lands, federal lands, whatever, if there's plantings on there, I'm looking at setting up in some of those areas with better visibility, so that when I call and a bird comes out in the open, he can see the decoys from a distance, kind of assess and evaluate things before he comes in. And a lot of times I find that birds are way more comfortable with approaching decoys they can see from a distance. So now, kind of on the terrain aspect of that, that's where, using HuntStand to kind of figure out where the tallest part of that clearing or field is, that's where I want to set up, because I know that my decoys are going to be visible from the most places. One other reason is that I've never decoyed a turkey downhill. For whatever reason, I hear guys that are really good elk hunters, and I do a lot of elk hunting myself, but some of the best elk hunters, they call those bulls downhill. But turkeys, for whatever reason, they are more prone to be called uphill or decoyed uphill. So I'm setting up on the highest point I can find in that open area.
Man, it's funny you say that, because I podcasted with somebody last year that talked about that, and I'd never heard of that. And then I started thinking back to all the times that I've turkey hunted here in Texas, and I started thinking about, some situations that I've run into like that, and I'm like, oh, it does make sense. I don't know why I couldn't tell you. I'll have to get somebody on here that could tell us.
Yeah, maybe it's as simple as the eyesight. Elk don't have that great eyesight, to be honest. I mean, you see guys set up, they say set up in front of a tree, don't set up behind it. And as long as your outline is disrupted, you're fine with elk. Turkeys, they don't miss anything. I mean, you blink your eye and they can take off sometimes. So maybe it's just just the fact that if they're up on a high spot looking down and they don't see a bird, obviously if you have decoys, that helps. But if they're, if you're hunting without decoys or something and they can see down there and they don't see a bird, but they hear the calling, I mean, it's kind of kind of obvious why they might get suspicious, I suppose.
Yeah.
Where an elk, they just don't have that great eyesight. So I'm not an expert on animal eyesight, but that could be a potential reason.
You never know, man. Never know. So, all right. So we've kind of talked about the things you're looking at before you even step foot on the public land, right? We've talked about the e-scouting, things you're looking for, terrain features. So let's talk about boots on the ground. You're dealing with public land, so you're gonna deal with traffic. So what are you doing opening morning when you spend a ton of time boots on the ground, you've identified where the birds are, and you feel great about this place, this spot, you get to the trailhead parking lot, and it is chocked full of other hunters. What do you do?
Okay, yeah, that's a good point to talk on. So, one time down in Florida on a non-quota wildlife management area, that did happen. There were actually, I think, 12 different vehicles parked there, and I got there well before daylight. Now, in that situation, so much of the property was, underwater that I kind of was limited to where I could hunt. So I went hunting anyway, ended up seeing a Jake, and that was about it. I did hear someone else shoot. So in that case, I just went hunting anyway. Typically, that doesn't happen in Wisconsin, believe it or not, even though, we're a fairly populous state. There might be one vehicle once in a while, two
Yeah.
at the very most, but I don't run into that a whole lot. But if I was to show up, to fill in the blank management area, and there were 6 vehicles, and I knew that I had plenty of other places I could pop into, I'm just going to keep driving. I'm not gonna go in there. For one, I think that it's, kind of that unspoken rule that first come, first serve. And
Yeah.
if I feel like, a property's already at capacity with who's there, I'm I'm not going to go in and try to jeopardize someone else's hunt. And, I would hope that people would kind of do that same thing for me too. I think about an antelope hunt that I was on out in Wyoming, and you could see across this walk-in area where I had spotted, a bunch of antelope the day before. And I went in there specifically for those antelope the next morning, and I got parked. I was there first, and I started actually stalking toward these antelope. And all of a sudden I see a Tahoe or a Suburban or something pull up, and all of a sudden these 2 guys get out, and this was a rifle hunt. And next thing I see, the orange going across the prairie. They're going at the same antelope that I'm going after, even though I was there first, and clearly stalking those antelope. They busted them out. So they ruined not only my hunt, but their own hunt, because they didn't go about it the right way. So I know this is about turkeys, but that's just kind of hammers home the concept of just be respectful. I mean, we're all out there trying to do the same thing. And if a property is at capacity, in that case it was, because you can see across it. And I was already out there. Just have respect for other people, and a lot of times, what goes around comes around. If you respect other people, they'll respect you.
Dude, absolutely. And I think I'm not going to deviate from it, but definitely like a message to everybody listening out there, like respect other people, especially when you pull up to the trailhead. And, I had a similar situation like yours this past year in Colorado, chasing after elk during archery season. We had got to the trailhead and we were the only truck, and, it was just starting to become daybreak. We're like, oh, awesome. First one here. We're going to get in and get a crack at these elk before it goes nuts, because everybody knows Colorado public land can be insane.
Yeah.
Just as I thought that, here comes a camp not far from where we were camped. 5 old dudes in a truck screaming up in their GMC. And literally, I mean, there was maybe enough parking space for an ATV in front of my truck, because I parked right at the trailhead, and they pulled up in that spot right in front, and they get out, and we're all just kind of looking at each other like, what's going on? And yeah, it wasn't a good situation. But yeah, to everybody out there, I mean, I think the big thing, you see something like that, do exactly what you just said, man. And that's, if you see trucks there, you got the vehicles there, more than likely you got a plan B, C, and D. Go to the next one.
Yeah. Or the other thing is, you can kind of predict how people are going to hunt a piece of public land. Another guy in the industry and I were talking about that on an interview recently, that if there's a trail or trailhead, 2-track, whatever, going in beyond the gate, you can kind of expect that most people are going to be within half a mile of there and maybe within 200 to 250 yards, maybe 300 yards off that trail. So if you use that trail as kind of a tree and then you imagine like branches off every so often, that could be kind of a pattern that you could expect a lot of people to be hunting. How many people are going to walk parallel to the road right from the parking area through the woods and hunt 10, 20 yards, whatever the legal distance is, off from the road? Not very many people, because they're under the impression that you got to get in there. You got to follow the trail that the DNR or whoever put in there. And I think it just comes down to, maybe you can hunt that same spot and just hunt it differently. But by all means, if you bump into someone, just get out of there and respect that they got there first. So yeah, there's ways to navigate around it and still have a successful hunt. And sometimes I always think of it as God's way of redirecting me to a better opportunity, to learn something that I wouldn't have learned if I would have gone in, and gone on my plan A. So there's merits to getting rerouted sometimes.
That's a good way to look at it. That's a good way. So you've gone past the trailhead. You've gone to plan B. You park. You're the first one there. You start going in. What's kind of your plan of attack from there? It's still dark. You stopping and listening to gobbles, or are you going straight into where you're assuming that they're roosting based off of some of your e-scouting?
Yeah, I'm going in with a particular destination in mind where I think there's going to be birds, but I don't go tromping so fast that I walk past birds. If I've never been to the property before and I don't really have a finger on the pulse of how the birds, their kind of daily routine or their exact roost area, or even if there's birds at all, I'm going in. It's a mix of passive and aggressive. You definitely want to get to that spot that you have a really good feeling about, because I've been turkey hunting for over 20 years now, so I have a lot of history to go off from on different situations, and a lot of times I'm pretty close and not too far off on what birds might be doing, even if I've never been on the property.
Yeah.
But I don't want to have that hammered in so deep that I forget to be cautious in other areas where maybe you don't expect a bird to roost, because who knows, maybe the day before somebody spooked a bird or something, he ended up roosting in this oddball spot because he got spooked from his typical roost. So I'm definitely being cautious and stopping to listen. But then if I start hearing a bird off in the distance, I'm not worried about making noise. I'm going to get there. Once I get within, 200 yards or so, obviously that's the time to slow down and start stalking closer. If you need to get closer, obviously you can call a bird in from that far a lot of times. But if I can get within 80 yards because of the terrain or something, I'm gonna get that close before I set up and call. So that's kind of my strategy. I do use the owl hoot. I'm able to do that, just with my mouth, and I do use that to locate toms. But most often, if it's not too windy, I can usually just hear them gobbling on their own come daybreak. Obviously, some turkeys in some areas are more vocal than others. I'm fortunate here where if there's a bird, roosted, he's usually gobbling on his own. I don't usually have to coax him into it. So that's kind of what I do in a nutshell.
Okay. So, that's kind of your morning approach. Are you the kind of guy that you're camped in, you're staying, not necessarily, when I say camped in, I'm not talking about like putting camp on your back and going in. I mean, if you do that, love to hear about it. But what I mean is you're going in and you're staking them out all day. You're going after some of those midday birds at midday madness. Have you found any success in doing that?
I usually don't marry myself to one property. If I go in there and they're not gobbling, I usually don't just sit there and wait. That doesn't mean that birds aren't going to come through there midday. But what I usually do, if I'm not hearing anything, or if I was on a bird and he just flat out, didn't want to play and went on to private land or something like that, I'm getting out of there and I'm going to go to plan A, plan B, or plan B, plan C, and so on until I've exhausted what I feel every effort, by let's say 10 o'clock in the morning. And then I will hunt, sometimes that midday is just awesome once they break off from the hens at certain points of the season. So definitely I hunt, all points of the day, but I don't marry myself to one property. I also have an e-bike, so where that's legal, I can cover a lot of ground. I've got a box call. I mostly use my mouth calls because those I can run really loud too.
Yep.
But what I do is I'll ride 75 yards, stop, listen for a minute, and then I'll rip off some calls, that can be heard from a long distance. And if I don't hear gobble, I'll wait, maybe a few more seconds, and I'll do some real loud cutting and then yelping. Nothing gobbles, down the trail I go. And I'm covering a lot of ground until I get one to gobble. But now when one gobbles, and especially in that mid-morning to midday time frame, man, set up quick, because I've had them come in stupid fast, to the point where it's just a wonder that I even got set up, because they were just boom, they're in. So that's a good point. You might not kill one right off the roost like we all imagine, that picture perfect scene, but there's definitely a lot of midday birds to be had for those who have the option. If you got to go to work, it's one thing, but if you have some time, definitely go and hit up multiple different parcels, and man, sometimes you can fill a tag that way.
Yeah, dude, that happened to me last year. It was early morning. They were pretty quiet. It was towards the end of the season, and for whatever reason, I don't know why these birds were in an area that they were. One sounded off, and I was like, man, it sounded pretty far. So called at him again, and he had cut the distance by quite a bit. And I mean, no sooner than I sat down, and I've got it. It's on film. It was on a Turkey Posse episode last year on the HuntStand page. This dude just comes screaming in straight to the decoy, and he was hot to trot. He was ready to play, and he got a face full of TSS. So, end of story on that one. But I want to talk to you about your decoy strategy because I feel like that's another big inhibitor when it comes to public land. I mean, obviously, there's decoys out there that are very packable, but then for some of those that really want to use the lifelike decoys, like your Avian X's that are just money, I mean, what decoys are you taking them in? What decoys are you taking in, and what is your ideal setup? So what I mean is, are you taking in like a breeder hen and a jake? Are you taking in just a tom? Like, what is usually strapped to your back?
So I usually, my go-to decoy spread is one hen and one like a 3/4 strut jake, or maybe half strut jake, I guess it would be. I have, with a bow, with a shotgun, I have shot so many toms over that setup. And I know a lot of guys get hung up, and they think you got to take a whole flock, and that works too. But I've also even just shot toms by putting out that half strut jake. There's just something about it, just triggers something in them to come and fight. I can't tell you. I lost the metal stake that my jake decoy came with, so I use arrows now. Just grab a random arrow out of the garage or whatever that I've got laying around, and I've had multiple arrows broken from toms coming and hitting that decoy. And it's not only effective to get the birds within range, but they get so in tune with that decoy that, I mean, I have drawn my bow back with their eyeballs in sight, because they're just so tuned in on beating up that decoy. Typically I do wait until their head passes behind something, or if their fan is blocking their head, of course. But there's been, I think, a couple times where, I mean, there was no reason to wait any longer, because they were just flat out gonna beat the tar out of that decoy. So I don't see any sense in taking 4 or 5 decoys, especially those realistic decoys like you're talking about, the avians and some of the other hard molded decoys. It's 2 of them has been very, very effective, and I don't need anyone to prove to me that 2 or 3 more of them would be any kind of benefit, because I'd say my response rate with that setup, if I get a tom to see that decoy spread, at least 80% of the time he's coming in. So that's what I've done.
So that was kind of one of the things I wanted to talk to you about next, because everybody's got their different ways of decoy spreads, what they like to use, what they don't like to use. Have you seen with like that half strut Drake? Have you ever dealt with Toms hanging up because they see that and they feel intimidated by that Jake at all?
Very few times.
Yeah.
I did have it happen. I did what's called it's like a depredation hunt up here in Wisconsin.
Mhm.
And I assume that maybe some other people had been hunting that property pretty hard because I had a tom gobbling really hard. I think he broke off hens. Yeah, because I remember hearing the hens yelping and stuff. And I was in this really neat pinch point. It would have been a great spot to sit during the rut for deer. It was like two field corners came together, but they were separated by an 80-yard, swath of timber. And
Dang.
so it was like a perfect like funnel area. So I set up in there thinking I could call him into there, which I did. And he got to 80 yards where he saw the decoy. And I was in the timber most of the times when I'm talking about these birds coming in and beating up the decoy. I'm usually sitting in the wide open in the middle of a field, with a ground blind. Or if I'm hunting without a blind, I'll sit on the edge and just put the decoys out in the field. So I
Mhm.
don't know if it was in the timber, he reacted differently, or if it was that he was hunted a lot. I'm not sure what the case was, but those are few and far between, man. They usually just come screaming in.
Yeah. Okay. What's your call volume like whenever you're out on public land? Because I feel like there's some guys that, we're some guys are getting out there as loud as they can. Some are going quiet because their thought process is that if other hunters are calling louder, that the bird's got that figured out, so they're gonna call softer and try and trick the bird. I mean, what's kind of your approach? I know you talked about essentially the cat road shuffle with your e-bike, but what's your process or thoughts on call volume?
So when I'm trying to locate a bird, like I was talking before, I'm loud. I want to not only for him to hear that hen yelping, but for it to be loud enough that he almost shock gobbles in a sense. So I call pretty darn loud when I'm trying to locate a bird. Now when I'm working him in, I'll scale back quite a lot for a few reasons. I feel like if he can hear me, there's no need to, just melt his face off with this loud calling. So I'll tame
Yeah.
it back a little bit. And then I just kind of see how he reacts as he's coming in. I gotta outline one bird that in particular that I shot on public land here in Wisconsin. I actually spotted him out on a private field that was bordering the public parcel that I actually shot him on. So this was interesting. He was out there with a hen, and it was late season. It was late in May, and I thought he's probably just going to stay with her because most of the other hens are already nesting, and he's got her. So why would he leave? I had to throw the kitchen sink at that bird, and I'm not saying call volume. So I worked that bird for probably an hour, and a few times he came closer, and I was just kind of like, I'd move around a little bit in the woods so that
Yeah.
I was, giving him a little bit of a different angle. Get this, I even climbed up a pine tree just on the limbs and looked through my binoculars to see if he was still out there, because for a while he went silent. I thought, okay, maybe he's gone. Well, I climbed up that pine tree and I was back in the timber far enough where he couldn't, see the movement.
Yeah.
And I go really slow. I'm super stealthy that way. I spotted him out there, so I thought, okay, he's still out there. So in that case, I started calling then from a different location once again, and he started responding and coming closer. But then he just would not come, inside the timber. I could not get him to poke his head inside there.
Mm.
So I totally shut up, gave him the silent treatment, and typically that works. With him, it did not work. He still just kind of stayed there, like, come out to me. I'm as close as I'm going to come. So in that case, you know what I do? I start scratching leaves if there's leaves around, and that is the deadliest call. If they're hung up, and it's almost like you get under their skin by stopping your yelping and just scratching.
Yeah.
Man, it's a deadly call. But
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
he poked in the woods, and I shot him at about 45 yards, and nice big limb hanger.
Heck yeah, dude. Bow or shotgun?
That was shotgun. Yep.
Nice. Nice. Man, that's like it's like raking a tree with elk or rattling.
Yeah.
So, yeah, same thought process.
Yep. And not very many people do that. If you run into other hunters on public land, you can usually hear what type of call they're using. Just you can hear the friction call scraping, and you can hear the paddle scraping if it's a box call. People just kind of wear out the same calls over and over, and you gotta kind of put yourself in their world a little bit and think, what can I give them that's exactly what they're used to, but that other hunters aren't constantly doing. And so that stuff works.
Like it, dude. Speaking of other hunters, how do you utilize pressure from those other hunters to try and kill a bird? Like, have you let hunters bring a bird to you, or how have you honestly just attacked the pressure?
Yeah. I guess, if I'm elk hunting, I'm usually on national forest where there's thousands of acres and everything you see is public all around you. So if I'm calling to an elk and I know some other people are also calling, I'm not going to just back off entirely. I feel like, being in the area, if that bull comes to me, it's fair game. I'm
Mhm.
not going to jeopardize someone else's hunt and try to cut them off or anything like that. I'm not going to do that. But, here in the Midwest, especially where I live, the parcels are much smaller. And so if I have, an inclination that somebody else is hunting a bird, I usually just back right out, man. I don't want to have any interaction. And quite frankly, we're hunting with shotguns for spring turkey. I don't want to be potentially in the line of fire or anything like that. So I usually just back out. I can't think of any particular instances when pressure actually brought a bird to me. One time I do remember my brothers, this was many years ago. My oldest brother was actually kind of hunting a bird on foot with his bow, trying to work it because it didn't come to the ground blind setup that he had. My
Yeah.
other brother was set up in a different field, probably at least a half a mile away. And as my older brother was dogging after this bird and it kept moving away from him, but gobbling, it was getting closer and closer to my other brother. And it ended up going right out into that field and going into his decoys. And he hammered it with his bow. So, stuff like that could happen. But that's the only case I think, that I can draw from where that's actually, brought a bird to someone when someone else was kind of pushing it or whatever.
Yeah. So, in regard to your public land philosophy, if you will, you pretty much like to try to be the first one, be the first one at the trailhead. So, early bird gets the worm essentially. And then, you're on e-bike a lot, doing essentially the cat road shuffle. So, you try to take that road less traveled, don't you? Get away from the pressure.
Yeah, the e-bike lets you get deeper into the parcel than a lot of people are willing to go. So that's an advantage. Um, and then the other thing is I'm not going to be limited to a road. An e-bike can go over some sticks, and even I don't know if it's advised, but I've driven over some small logs and stuff like that, as long as it doesn't hit the chain guard and things like that. But I'm not married to the trails. If I have a hunch about something, if I got to go cut right through hardwoods to get over to where, a piece of public meets some agriculture where I've been seeing birds, or where I think there might be birds on that agriculture, I'm just going to ditch the e-bike and stash it somewhere and kind of, like you said, take the road less traveled and get to where I think I need to be to fill a tag. Um, it's it's almost stupid what lengths I'll go to be successful. I remember times, this is fringing on the edge of insanity. I remember times just being covered in mosquitoes, and because the tom was gobbling, what I felt like, within eyesight of me, I couldn't see him necessarily, but I had so many mosquitoes that I not only I could hardly hear, but if I was to like just hit my knee like that, I kid you not, I would have had 10, 15 of them just with one little swat. And I'm sitting there getting just drilled by these mosquitoes, and because there's a tom gobbling right there, I'm not moving. I'm just enduring this mosquito onslaught basically. So,
Nope.
maybe I'm not the the brightest bulb in the chandelier, but I do fill a lot of tags by doing things, just being willing to suffer a little bit and do things like that.
It's funny you say that. It's kind of one of those things, like whenever I'm out west chasing after elk and stuff, I'm constantly in my head like yelling at myself like, do what others won't so you can do what others can't.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
And if you keep that in your mind, I mean, I feel like it's gonna lead you to places where, giant birds, giant elk, giant deer are, man.
Yeah, it totally does. I can point to a lot of different scenarios over the years where that has been the case. Goes back to what I said earlier. You can kind of predict how 90% of the hunters are going to attack a piece of public land and
Mhm.
then just try to do things differently. And a lot of times that's all you need to do to be successful.
Yeah, because I mean, if you think about it, just doing something different, I mean, those animals are moving away from them because they hear them, they see them, they know that there's pressure, and so yeah, I mean that's a good way to look at it, is just thinking about what you can do differently from everybody else. So
Yeah.
that would
Yeah,
put you in
exactly.
the right spot. Well, man, I know
Hmm.
we're running out of time here, so kind of give the listeners any last minute golden nuggets that you might have when it pertains to turkey land, or when it pertains to turkey hunting on public land.
I think, we did touch on it earlier, but I can't hammer home enough the concept of stick with it. And even if you don't stay on one property, once it gets to be, 9 o'clock in the morning, just being out there, everyone wants to go back to the local restaurant and have breakfast or whatever. And it's like, just a lot of times you can get into birds mid-morning. It's happened a lot of times to me. The
Mhm.
other thing I would say is master the mouth call, the ability to call without making any movement. Sometimes you get a bird that's at 50 yards and your shotgun's good to 40, for people shooting stuff that's not, the TSS and all the tight choke tubes and all that. The ability to give just a little purr or a little cluck, a lot of times calms them down and you don't have to make any movement to do it.
Yeah.
It's a game changer. If you had to reach down and pick up your pot call or your box call or your push button, whatever it might be, you can't do that because you're going to spook them the moment you move your hand. So figure out the mouth call. Don't choke on them.
Yeah.
Seen people have the gag reflex or whatever, and I guess don't get too mad at it either. It's like throwing a football or shooting an arrow, in a bullseye. Not everybody can do it the same way or as effectively, but if you can spend enough time with it, watch enough tutorials and stuff like that, I think most people can eventually figure out the mouth call. And man, it's a game changer, especially if you're hunting without a ground blind. It's I rarely carry other calls if I'm, hunting without a ground blind. It's just easier to be mobile. That's another thing. You don't have the box call with the paddle, making noise or rattling around, just a more mobile setup all around. And I truly think that mouth calls are the most realistic as well. Once you figure out how to use them, it sounds like a real turkey.
Yeah, absolutely. So less is more. Less is
Yeah. Yep. I believe that.
Well, I love it, man. Well, Darren, tell all the listeners real quick where they can find you on social media or any of your latest work.
Yeah, so my handle is McDougal Hunting on Instagram. I'm also on Facebook, and I sell articles to whoever will buy them. So I'm pretty well immersed into the bow hunting titles, specifically Bowhunter magazine. I have a column in Bow Hunting World. I do some stuff for a trade magazine called Archery Business,
Mhm.
and multiple different online channels. Peterson's Bow Hunting online, bowhunting.com, realtree.com. There's a lot of different places. So I guess if someone took an interest in wanting to see what I write about, go on Google and just search my name, spell it right. It's Darron. Most people it's with a en, so
Yeah.
get the spelling right, and you'll see lots of different links to my work that I've recently published. And I think you'll enjoy it. I try to be as genuine as possible. I think that's the only way to live life, be genuine. And so what you read of mine is true to the fullest extent of my knowledge, and that's how I do things. I write about things that I'm I'm good at and that I'm, skilled at. And then I also do a lot of writing on what other people are successful doing. I do a lot of big buck stories for like Realtree and stuff like that. And it's really put me in contact with a lot of different makes and models of people. And I've learned so much over the years by doing those interviews, for articles. So yeah, if you find an interest in wanting to see where I'm at, just Google my name and you'll find all kinds of stuff.
Sweet, dude. Man, I appreciate your time today and hopping on the HuntStand podcast with me.
Yeah, thanks, Will. It was a pleasure.